The next panel is themed Made in Africa, Economic Liberation and Homegrown Businesses. It will be moderated by Angelo Izama, a seasoned journalist, a researcher, and a very well-known media personality. Angelo? Please, the people going out, grab refreshments and come back because we are running short on time. As Angelo makes his way to the stage, I'll introduce the other panelists. We have Magate Wad, founder and CEO of Tiosan. She's from Senegal. We have Kim Kamarebe, who hails from Uganda. She is the co-founder and chief investment officer of Damascus Capital. We have Dayo Ogunyemi, CEO of 234 Media in Nigeria. We have Serge Kamohinda, an advisor, a policy advisor in the president's office. Then last but not least, we have Jean Bosco Nizeimana, CEO of Habona Limited in Rwanda. Jean Bosco? He's coming up. Okay. Let me give the floor immediately to our moderator to introduce the subject and kick off the discussions. Please continue being involved. Oh, sorry, my mistake. We have leading remarks before I give the floor to Angelo. We have leading remarks from Roland Kweman. He is the former president of Junior Chamber International, and he hails from Cameroon.
So I'll go straight to the point because time is against us and time is money. So just since we are in a family, and I want us to be honest, because if in a family, we always say the truth. This morning we were asked to leave the lobby at 7 a.m. Because some of us had to go and do our registration and all this. So at 7 we were there. The bus driver was on time, the team was on time, but most of the delegate was late. And we waited for 45 minutes for one person. And I want to thank, is it Robert? Yes? Who started now like shouting and, I mean, not shouting, but like saying, hey guys, we should go. And at the end, the guy did not even come. And one person was waiting, and the bus were like 30, we moved. So time is really money. And we can see now we have to rush. I had to speak for 10 minutes. I will use 5 so that you guys gain 5 minutes. Please, can you clap for me for the 5 minutes I'm giving you? So I will ask more questions than giving answers because, I mean, I'm so inspired by the quality and the high profile of the panelists. So I have 3 questions. As JCI president, I was very fortunate to meet some great leaders, and one of them is the Dalai Lama. And I remember he told me everything started in Africa. Everything started in Africa. And I'm a strong Catholic Christian, committed and practicing Christian. So he told me, he's sure I read the Bible, I say it on a daily basis. And he told me, when you read the Bible, are you common with the Old Testament or the New Testament? I said the 2. Then he said, okay, you go to the Old Testament, you will see that 2 great men, 2 great patriarchs of the Jewish tradition all live in Africa. We are talking about Joseph and Moses, to make it short. And the greatest, and I'm so happy he talked about the greatest, which is Jesus Christ, which is the greatest leader of all time. People don't know. Do you know he spent 10 years in Africa? When he had to be killed as a kid, where the angel asked the parent to go? To Egypt. And he spent 10 years there. So Africa has played a major role in the prosperity and the progress of humanity. It's unfortunate that many of us don't know that. And now in terms of leadership, you have three terms that are so important. You have the past, you have the present, and you have the future. It's very important for us as Africans to know our past. And we can even trace it even as 3,000 years. And when you look at it, it was a glorious past. It's so important because this past is going to inspire us to understand the current challenges, the current problems and opportunities that we are facing as a generation. And if we can understand them and even take ownership, it will be easier for us now to look at a hopeful future. So these are the three questions I want us to reflect. I'm talking to the audience. The first one, what is the last thing you will not want to lose? What is the last thing you will not want to lose? You can lose everything except that. The second question is, what is our most outstanding life experience or positive life experience? Because when they talk about Africa, you just see war, HIV, AIDS, corruption, but they say positive Africa. So what is the most positive thing that you think you can celebrate? And last question, how would you want to be remembered? How do you want, because we are going to pass away. Today we are talking about Kwame Nkrumah. We are talking about Lumumba. We are talking about Paul Kagame. But these individuals had a vision. So how do you want to be remembered in terms of legacy? Now, some practical questions that I'm sure this team is going to help us, and that will help us also to achieve our goals as leaders and entrepreneurs, is where are we today? And it came to the speech, many times the speech of the minister, honorable minister. Where are we today? Where do we wish to arrive? I mean the destination. When? The deadline. Because time is money, and time is moving so fast. How do we want to get there? The strategy. Who will do what? When? How? With what means? We have to be very realistic. Now, I want it to be very clear. My humble experience as someone who is passionate about youth leadership, entrepreneurship, the only thing that will stand between your vision and accomplishing it is fear. And we're afraid because what? We don't know ourselves. We're also afraid because we don't have the competency, sometimes the knowledge. So it's very important for us as leaders to be learners. We stop learning, we stop leading. There are two ways to succeed as a leader or entrepreneur. The first one is by using people, which is a big tragedy in Africa. And the second one is by serving people, which is a very rare species, servanthood leadership. No amount of money, achievement, or celebrity can be compared to the feeling you get when you make a positive difference in someone's life. And now, in my humble experience as JCI president, JCI is a worldwide organization. We're in 125 countries. As JCI president in 2010, I traveled to 71 countries. Now, that is 2010. So 4 years after my presidency, I've been very passionate and committed traveling in Africa. This is what I have come as conclusion. They will hardly even tell me, Mr. President, you made a great speech. I met thousands of members out of the 250,000 of members in the organization. Thousands. They don't even remember the speech I made. Some even forget the project and the initiative that we implemented as JCI president. But believe me, many of them, the majority, will never forget how I make them feel as a leader. And yesterday in the bus, I had I think she will be in the panelists in the afternoon, and we were talking, I asked her, can you give me the name of Miss of her country, or I think she was from Kenya. I don't even know the name of Miss Cameroon last year. Pretty lady, by the way, I have a good picture with her, but I don't know her name. I forgot her name. But I remember the name of my primary school teacher. Do you remember the name of your teacher? Yes. But you can forget the name of the prettiest lady of your country because it doesn't count. So I want to leave you with two African proverbs. A poor dancer always blames the drums. So let us stop the ABC syndrome. A standing for accusing, B for blaming, and C for complaining. Let us stop it. That's not how we are going to move this continent to the next level. And the last quotation, African one again. I'm very proud African, but I'm sorry, I'm wearing suit. Maybe from China, but I think in the evening I'm going to wear my Nigerian dress. or Cote d'Ivoire shirt. A short man hangs his bag where his hand can reach it. At the end, let us also be realistic. So thank you very much, and God bless Africa.
Okay. Welcome once again, and greetings on behalf of the organizers of this forum. I'd like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to Umurinzi, Young Professionals, and Leo Africa Forum. This is the pragmatic and intellectual response to the challenges at hand. I like to associate myself with it as part of the adjunct faculty for Leo Africa. This session was initially supposed to be moderated by Mamadou Toure, founder of Africa 2.0 Foundation. He couldn't make his flight. There are people on the other side of the building that are talking about infrastructure. I think they should answer why Mamadou couldn't be here. And so I was drafted literally 10 minutes ago. But I was telling my colleagues there that since everyone has been talking about rising to the challenge, well, I am committed, I'm here, and I'm happy to moderate this session. Now, I'm not convinced personally that with that statement you've heard from the outgoing speaker and speakers, that Africans are good at diagnosing their condition, but poor at responding to them. I think that statement, when you hear it over and over again in its iterations, you go to a conference and you hear, the problem with Rwandans, Ugandans, Kenyans is that they're good at creating policies, but bad at implementing them. That simply says they just don't know. Please don't, if a diagnosis doesn't lead to action, it simply means you're in a state of a lack of knowledge. Something is missing there. So let's abandon that statement in its entirety and just accept that where no action has arisen, we simply don't know. And it is that response or the challenges of that condition that I'm going to put to this panel. It's called Made in Africa, Economic Liberation and Homegrown Businesses. Let me start this by putting a question to Magati Wade, and I'm sorry if I get the names confused here, who's the founder and CEO of Toisan in Senegal. I met her last night, and she gave a brief introduction about how Africa ought to be represented in terms of production, made in Africa goods, and that sort of thing. Well, the question I want to put to her is this. Many people before, in the previous session, have spoken about consumerism. That, what Africa consumes reflects Africa's identity. I want to ask, does it also mean, a response to Africa's problems? Because across Africa, there's a desire to industrialize and so on and so forth, create African goods and services. But do these goods and services are they in response to Africa's problems, or in fact, are we simply aping this idea that to industrialize is to develop?
Thank you. My name is Magat Wade, and the name of my company is Tiosan. Tiosan means the origins of culture and the origin of humanity in Wolof, which is the main indigenous language of Senegal. So when I hear you talk about, do we need to be industrialized to make it? I sincerely don't know any country that has made it without manufacturing. And manufacturing is about making stuff. Now, if there's another way, by all means, please let me know. But too often, I am bothered by this idea that because somebody else has done it, so we have this schizophrenic way of looking at the world, us Africans. A side of us is like, oh, we don't want to be like them. So anything that they do must be, we have to go against it, even if it's something good. And another side of us is like, oh, let's copy everything because they're so much better than us. I mean, there's a healthy in-between somewhere there, and I think that healthy in-between comes when you really do own your mind, when you can think critically and you can think independently for yourself. Because thinking independently allows you to take what's good, even if it doesn't come from you, and take from your own good and make a new good. So it's almost like racism from another angle, and to me, it's not okay. So, we have talked, and I loved what you said, the ABC. I am a firm warrior against the ABCs. Everybody knows me for my mantra, which doesn't belong to me, but it's a mantra that I live by, and it's very simple. It says, criticize by creating. Anything that's not right, you criticize by creating. You don't sit there and just complain all day long about stuff. So I'm going to tell you about my story, and my story is all about criticizing by creating. I never know what my words are going to do. I never know how people are going to take what I say. But it doesn't matter, because guess what? It's just my story, and I think that if I have a story like that, others could have the same one. So I was born in Senegal, in the west coast of Africa, and I was primarily raised by my grandmother in my early, most formative years. And when most other people, kids, were going to school, especially young girls, I was allowed not to go to school. And today I like to say that it was my greatest opportunity, actually. And let me correct right there quickly before anybody wants to slash my head for being against education. The type of education that my grandmother took me away from was the education that really, quite frankly, in Senegal, even when you go to the best schools, these are like, schools, it's mainly like the colonial style. You learn to be formatted. And my grandmother said, I want her to live a free life. So instead of going to school, I spent most of my time outside playing with little boys. And I was basically the leader of my little clan, and the clan of only little boys. And do you know what I learned on that journey of every day when they come and they expect me to take them on a little journey of adventures? Later on, I didn't know what I was learning there, but I was learning what it is to lead a group of people where each person has a different desire that morning. But you find a way to make it all work for them and take everybody towards the same direction. And at the end of the day, they come back and they all had a great experience. And I learned that not in school. I learned that just hanging out in my village, free as free can be. And later on, when my parents learned that I was not going to school, they decided to deport me. I use that word deliberately, deported me to Germany in the middle of a winter when I didn't even know what the cold weather was, let alone, ice, like snow coming from the sky. And I went, and I remember my grandmother saying, she said, when you go, they're going to speak a language there that you don't speak. There are going to be ways there that you know nothing about, a new culture, everything. And she said, I don't want you to give up when you go, and I don't want you to be intimidated. She said, remember that at the end of the day, they're all human beings, they're all people. What they can do, you too can do. Just remember. And I went, and yes, I couldn't speak the language, and yes, I didn't understand who these people were. And yes, my parents had 2 children behind my back. I didn't know who these people were. I had this family that I didn't know. It was hard. It was hard. But I remember what she said. She said, anything that they can do, you can do too, and if not better. Because you're a human being, they're a human being, they got nothing on you. And that's what I did. So it took me 6 months, but after 6 months, I got to everybody's level, and I beat everybody in my class. 6 months. And I didn't speak the language when I started. Thank you. And just as I started to be comfortable in Germany, 2 years later, my parents decided, oh, now we're going to move to France. I'm like, are you kidding me? But yes, we packed up and we went to France. And there I had the similar problem. Yes, I was speaking French, but there's a difference between speaking a language and using it in school. And there again, it took me 6 months to catch up with everybody else and be ahead of everybody else, and they started having me jump classes. So I tell this story not as bragging, but because of the power of what happens when you too believe that you can. This is not just a slogan, the fact that you can. If up here you are not free, if up here you don't believe in who you are and what you can do, it doesn't matter, even if you achieve something, always remember that even that success could have been multiplied by 1,000,000 if only you have achieved it still believing. So for me, what is up here is very important. So earlier when we were talking about consumerism, once again, I take it as complaining. You complain that other free people want to buy a good that's different from yours. Well, that's why I love the markets, because the markets don't lie, do they? You can't force me to buy something I don't want or I don't need. It's that simple. I don't care. So you complain that I buy the stuff from China, complain all you want. You know, someone like me, what I did instead, I realized that people from my country were not buying our traditional natural beverages, the bisap, the hibiscus drink, for my first company. Instead of just sitting there complaining, oh, why are people abandoning their culture and this and that and blah, 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 and the jobs are being lost and people are putting themselves into boats and trying to cross over the ocean to go to Europe, and thousands of my youngest, most entrepreneurial people at the bottom of the ocean feeding fish. I could sit there and I could complain. Actually, I will confess, I did. It was so overwhelming that for 3 days, I was ill to my stomach. I was back home, and I just couldn't function anymore. All I wanted to do was to die. I just wanted to die. I was so upset. I was so disappointed in us, in me, in who we are, and the fact that we cannot believe that we're as good as anybody else, and that lack of self-esteem pushes us to just always consume something different. And at some point, it dawned on me. It was my job to create something that people would want. And if Africans could not recognize the value in my brand and the product that I made because of whatever is going on, then I'm gonna do reverse colonialism on them. I'm gonna make my product some of the most elite and top product in the West, and then bring it back to them if that's all they can understand. And it's okay, because if a generation goes through that, by the time your children are born, they're gonna be born with brands that I built. And they will not have the same sense of lack of self-esteem. So I'm going to wrap up quickly. That was company number one. Company number one, by the way, when you guys complain, Africans, what do they do for each other? You know, we raised more than $32 million. Not one dime came from an African person. Not one dime came from a black person, from a black person. So this is just a story for you guys. And my product, it was less than 10% of black people buying it. So again, I don't complain because I know there's a path and it's going to get there. So my second company is skincare. We're taking the same exact path, and now people are paying attention, and I know we're going to get somewhere. But again, it's not about complaining. You cannot work against people. Understand them, understand where they come from, and try as much as you want to give them what they want, because you can't force people. I'm not about force. So that was my little story. I feel like I cut it short. There's a lot of other things that I wanted to say, but on a nutshell, at the end of the day, the story is very simple. I like to believe in myself. Call me arrogant, call me anything you want. I believe in myself, I stand proud.
Thank you very much. Remember, we have a couple of days ahead of us, so a lot of the interaction, and I encourage it, so does Umurinzi. Feel free to interact with each other and the panelists when they're not on the podium. But for the rest of the panel, I'm going to ask them to keep their answers pretty short, because we have now about maybe slightly under half an hour to go. So perhaps I can bring in Kim Kamerebe here. What are the cultural products from manufacturing, this so-called made in Africa, that can best represent Africa in the global marketplace? I get a sense from her that there is pride in having made in Africa on the shelf, and that pride identifies Africa. It inspires young people. What kind of cultural products can we put on that global marketplace?
Thank you, Angelo. Just as an introduction, I am an investor and an entrepreneur, so I very much deal with that avenue of things. To answer your question directly, I think I'll take you back to my very first client, who is answering exactly that question, who faced that same challenge. When I was an investment banker in Europe in 2009, I convinced my bank to allow us to look at African businesses, and they put some money in us, and we traveled to different capitals across Africa to meet local entrepreneurs with the intention of pitching to the company, to our investment bank, that indeed investing in Africa was profitable and not as risky as they perceived it to be. And one of those, in our tours, one of the companies that we met was a Ugandan group of 6 entrepreneurial guys who wanted to be the first people in Africa to solve an African problem by being the first people to manufacture HIV/AIDS and malaria medicines on the continent, which sounded absolutely ridiculous to everybody who they pitched this business to, because the consensus, even from us, the African bankers who were sitting there, was the same. Why you? Why Uganda? If Egypt's not doing it, if South Africa's not doing it, if Morocco's not doing it, and they have established health care, and they have manufacturing, in Uganda you're manufacturing at best cold medicines, why you? And they said, why not us? We have been distributing these drugs over the last 15 years in this country. More and more, because of laws around the World Trade Organization, there is a disincentive for foreign company manufacturers to continue to make these medications affordably. Generic medications, which are medications that we consume because we can afford, are now no longer likely going to be able to be produced by India and China. And that leaves, and no one really cares when it comes to diseases like HIV/AIDS outside of Africa, because these diseases disproportionately affect us. So for us, we're not looking at this as a solution to our distribution business going out of business. We're looking at this as, what happens to Africa when these companies stop making these drugs? And we have no pharmaceutical manufacturing background, but much like Eddie said, we'll create it. We'll figure it out. We'll learn it online. We'll partner with the companies that have been doing this in the past, but we want to do this. And really, to cut a very long story short, we were very skeptical in the beginning, but when we continued to listen to them, there was no reason. There was no reason not to back them. Every single avenue that we probed with them to see if they had done the work, if they had pursued excellence, if they knew that they could do this to them. I know pharmaceutical manufacturing is probably the most difficult manufacturing because it requires the highest level of excellence. It has the most stringent requirements because you're making something that is essentially extremely, in terms of its content, extremely specific. And they had done it all. They had done all their homework, and we decided to back them. And we backed them. They built Quality Chemical Industries, which became the first firm in Africa to manufacture ARVs and antimalarials. To the credit of African governments as well backed them and came in as consumers of their drugs, said, if you can make this and if you can meet the World Health Organization standards and the World Health Organization can tell that to us, we will be happy to buy your drugs. And today, they are very few years later, in only 5 years, they're close to $1 billion company. They're doing magnificent things. 90% of their workforce is Ugandan. They have created pharmaceutical manufacturing in Uganda as an industry. They have changed the world, right? And they've obviously received awards for this across Africa. But those things, people later are very ready to hand over placards to you to say, well done. But in reality, their story should be no different from the story of anyone in this room, should be no different from your story, Angela, or mine, right? They did not execute rocket science. They did not need connections or, billions of dollars to do what they did. They backed themselves. They believed that there's no reason an African cannot make a solution for their problem. They believed it with a conviction that we could not distort. They did it, and very few years, they're one of the fastest ever manufacturing successes that we have seen across the continent. Very few years later, they're doing it and replicating the model across the continent. And just listening to the welcoming remarks today reminded me of a story about a post-slavery abolition in the South in the US story. I think I watched it on TV, and it was kind of a documentary about people, a lot of slaves after the abolition, who, you know, were sent out of their plantations, go on, do whatever you need to do. The law is that we can no longer have you as slaves anymore. And a few days later, many of them came back. Many of them came back to their slave owners and begged to be slaves again. And you ask yourself why, you know? And it really comes back to what the theme of this conference is about. Liberation without economic liberation is just liberation in name, you know? And so as we look at shaping our future, pushing successes on the back of the liberation of, in our political settings, if you look at Rwanda 20 years on, Africa, many of us are 50 years on from our liberation, but we're not yet free. We have not yet shaped our future. We're still in the process. And it's because we may be liberated in name politically, but we have not been economically liberated. So the Minister of Youth spoke earlier about this, and I just want to echo what he said. I think the question that every one of us has to ask ourselves is, are we prepared to step up to the mantle and to be the leaders to liberate Africa economically?
One of my favorite speeches I like to listen to over and over again, just to take it from what she said about the African American movement, is the 1964 speech by Malcolm X called "The Ballot or the Bullet," about why it's either liberty or death. But in that speech, he says something about liberating the ghetto. And to quote him, he says, well, what black Africans needed was a do-it-yourself philosophy, a do-it-right-now program. It's already too late program. And I get a sense that, it was 1964, just 2 years after Uganda's independence. But we see that Africa tends to remain stagnant. And these are the challenges that young people will confront. Hopefully, another 30 or 40 years, we will not be having these challenges. I particularly like, and I want to put this to Dio, if the pronunciation is correct, the idea that industry should be responding, like in the case of quality chemicals, to the challenges of the time, not just manufacturing for its sake. Now, in the context of Africa to Africa trade, knowing the challenges of moving labor around, moving investment around, where are the new opportunities that are sort of leading the way for African youth entrepreneurs, the opportunities that are within Africa that are responding to Africa's challenges, so to speak?
That's an interesting question, and I think it really does speak to the title of this, which is Made in Africa and Economic Liberation and Homegrown Businesses. In the opening remarks and in the earlier session, we've had a lot of references to the difficulties in crossing borders, both for people and for goods in Africa. One of the things that has historically traveled with the greatest amount of ease over the last 50 years in Africa is culture, arts, media, film, music, literature. In West Africa, we've listened to the rhythms of Congolese music. Earlier in the session, in the previous session, Edwin asked a question about Nigeria, Africa's so-called giant, 170 million people. Now with a rebased economy, the supposed largest economy in Africa, and he asked, does anybody in this room seen a Nigerian product? We're surrounded by Chinese products, apparently. And Robert laughed and said, Nollywood. And that's right. It's intellectual property. It's traveled. Yesterday when I came into this country, a lot of people said, but Oga, you don't sound like a Nigerian. Because an image has already been created about what Nigeria sounds like. So to put it in a nutshell, I think that it's not the only area, and I think that the points that have been made about industrialization and manufacturing and creating are important, but we are also seeing the rise of the knowledge economy. We had a conversation about pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are intellectual property. So some of the things that will travel and have traveled in Africa are intellectual property products. But the questions that I would ask beyond, the things actually traversing borders is, who owns these things? Who creates them? How do they get dispersed? I was hoping that we would be able to interrogate questions, and I'll just put it out there because I know the conversations go beyond this stage, but can we interrogate the sources and destinations of capital in this so-called Africa that is rising? Can we interrogate what the objectives and priorities of economic development are? Can we interrogate what ownership is? And I'll tie this back to media. Last night, the World Cup was playing. All across Africa, probably over 300, 400 million people were watching events that were happening in Brazil, live. The outcomes of this conference cannot be delivered to Africans at the scale at which the results of a Man United and Arsenal match can be delivered. That's a fact. And it's something that we should think about. One of the things that I found fascinating growing up in the 70s in Africa and then traveling in the rest of Africa in the 70s and 80s was that on the literary front, there was this shared landscape, shared mindscape, if you will, created by the books of Chinua Achebe, Ngugi, Bessie Head, Mariam Abba. There was a commonality that we had. You could step in and people had read these different books and we'd meet wherever we were and have this shared understanding of Africa. Today, Nollywood has maybe become a lowest common factor that's derided because of the perceived lack of values, story values, production values, moral values, if you will. But it's the only thing that has consistently been able to create that shared landscape. So I look at it and say that how can we improve on that? If we're sitting in Kigali, imagining that there's an important message that we need to share, an important conversation we need to have amongst Africans, how do we have that conversation? How do we ensure that the only conversation that's shared is the results of football matches? How do we get all these other conversations within the mix? That question itself brings us to the nature of media and technology. There's a lot of celebration of the democratizing effect that technology has. A lot of us are on social media, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and there's this imagination that there's this broad conversation that's happening, but some of that is just an echo chamber. And even beyond the idea of an echo chamber, there's the fact that the technology we use, the Samsung phones, the Apple products, the platforms that we use, are platforms and technologies where consumption is being mistaken as participation and creation. But it really isn't. If we're having a conversation that's happening on Twitter or on Facebook, that's being delivered by devices coming from the US or China or Japan, we need to ask that question on, what are we creating? And I think that's why, in spite of the laughs and the derision that Nollywood often encounters, I think that there's something powerful there. And those are things that we need to explore in very serious ways.
Daryl, if I may, there is if you get cable TV, you'll see that there's competition between South American soap operas and Nigerian soap operas. But the other day, on the BBC, just as Nigeria and the World Cup, because it was one of the few African teams left, was part of the conversation on Twitter and Facebook. The BBC Africa debate was held somewhere in Nigeria, and the conversation was about conflict and Boko Haram. And the question they asked again and again is whether Nigeria, Africa's biggest, most promising economy, the largest population, had an image problem. Now, brand Nigeria seems to me to encounter a challenge every time, even if we want to celebrate it. It is tainted by conflict. It is tainted by this idea that Nigerians are corrupt and thieves. And then it cannot compete as effectively as other brands in this space. Now, we are trying to respond, just in terms of ideas that liberate, to inspire African young people, especially in this country, to aspire to strong brands that represent excellence. What do you see is the challenge for managing the image of African brands, given the type of opportunities that technology has brought to the fore? Because they can tell a story that is good and they can tell a story that is bad. Quickly, if you may.
I don't believe in managing brands. Magad had some interesting comments yesterday, which I think were important, that brands are a way of communicating things. But I think that countries are countries. A country is not a brand. If I live in Nairobi, some of the, if something happens in the coast, I get calls from people asking, "Are you safe?" etc. There are 1,000,001 stories that go on in Africa, and I think, from my part, looking at a BBC, and this is not to knock the BBC, but looking at the BBC and CNN and deciding that the priority is on whoever is there and deciding what story should come on, responding to those priorities can't be my objective. I have to look and say, what are the opportunities within Africa? How do we monetize those opportunities? I'd rather have a conversation with Robert on what New Vision is doing and how to get into those markets than I'll have on, quote unquote, managing Nigeria's brand.
Well said, my friend. I would say that is the kind of response that Robert would like to hear. So, Saj, there's a challenge here. There are many Africas. In fact, in many countries, there are Africas within Africa. Someone talked about inequality being the quintessential challenge of our times. I want to draw a lesson from the World Cup. I was watching the World Cup in a gym somewhere in the outskirts of Kampala, and the keeper of the gym, he doesn't speak very good English. He says, "But why do these Brazilians look like the Somalis we have in the middle of Katanga? They are half castes, and why are they poor?" Which is the same conversation that was happening in Brazil around the World Cup about inequality, about things like that. So there are many Africas, but we tend to talk about Africa as a homogeneous thing. Pan-African Youth Conference here, as if it's something that we understand. How can Made in Africa respond to that diversity and do so with products?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, Made in Africa is basically about the people. And Made in Africa should reflect the people we are talking about. But if you look at the facts, there are some hard truths we need to acknowledge. If you take in the region our champion for innovation, we know is Kenya. For instance, we know the story of M-Pesa, that is a story of hope. Kenya in 2012 has submitted around 123 patents to the WIPO, WIPO. When you look at South Korea,
That's the World Intellectual Property Organization.
yes, thank you. South Korea has submitted 148,000. So this is the gap. Now, the problem is, if you look at South Korea and Kenya, we have the people endowed with the same qualities, I would say endowed with the same dignity. Now, what is it that is lacking? A lot has been said in the morning. People have emphasized on manufacturing, and it's true that manufacturing will allow us to absorb low-skilled labor force. We are a young continent, and it will allow us also to solve our trade deficit because we import less and produce more locally. But there is a little caveat to manufacturing, because if you look at the conditions for manufacturing, and if you look at what has been said today in the morning by the carpenter, the low skills, you find that the problem there is not that all African countries are going to do manufacturing, because the problem is simply that you wouldn't find productive people in this manufacturing. Let's say if tomorrow a government would invest all, let's say, land and resources and tell people go into manufacturing, give the carpenter an opportunity, a market, it won't be possible because people are not productive. So, and if you look at Asia, East Asian tigers, you find that they didn't take manufacturing instead of agriculture. They were both productive in both sectors. So the issue is more productivity as opposed to which share of GDP is taken by a mode of production. And people have now, discussions have gone back to another issue. They've said it's the way we are organized. If you are, African countries are predominantly rural, we need more urbanization, we need more regional integration, free movement of services, goods, and labor. But the problem is Africa is very urbanizing at a very high rate. But the problem again is that you find that we are urbanizing with a lot of slums. So the problem is still some sort of a sophistication, some sort of using resources we have efficiently. So issues of productivity, issues of more sophisticated state efficiency. And people have said, no, it's not so much how we produce, it's not so much how we live, it's the politics. And they said it's because we lack democracy. But in the debate about democracy, the problem is that as long as you don't have a link between the citizen and the leadership in terms of taxes, whereby the citizen are giving a mandate and there is a link of accountability, as long as you still rely on external resources, then you won't have a democracy, because if democracy is about the will of the people need to be able to efficient that way. So the problem you find, there is no private sector to give taxes. So my point is, in all these three, let's say, reasons that have been invoked, and you find that the caveat is lack of productivity, lack of accountability, or lack of efficiency. The problem is more deeper than that, and you find it even in this room. We are talking about liberation, but if you look at the people, you won't think that there is an issue of liberation in Africa. We are all seated and we are listening, and we are in a hotel, and so it's as if we are talking about using, taking a route via plane or something via a car or train, as if we are not talking about issues of life and death. Yet, liberation is about life and death. So it's something deeper than that, and I like that you have alluded to Brazil, which is a country, I think, which is hosting, if not the second, the first black population in the world. The issue is dignity. And I want to borrow a bit from the experience here in Rwanda, because what we want, what we need to achieve is a turnaround situation. And in Rwanda, we have had a turnaround situation. And it was not that people were in an urban center. It is not that all of a sudden we discovered a new mode of production. It is not that our policies were much more, that we took a development paradigm which is out of the moon or something new. It's about dignity. We are in a country whereby people used to live, and the state told the people that you are not an asset. You are an enemy of the state, or you should be the enemy of your brother. And you find that this paradigm is not so much different from other places in Africa. In our history, our states, our leaders did not see us as economic agents. They saw us a product, and through slavery, people have sold African. When the product was didn't find a market anymore, they started to sell natural resources. But still, the African citizen was not valued. And we can never develop unless there is a relationship that is valuing African citizen from the state to the citizen. But it is not only about the state and the citizen, it is also about how we view each other. Because in Rwanda, 20 years ago, there was a genocide, meaning some people thought that their fellow citizens were not worth living. Now we have a situation whereby we have economic growth and stability. It means that people were brought to this very fundamental or basic insight to realize, no, actually my fellow countryman is worth living, is worth doing business, conducting business, and the state itself has recognized it. So speaking about, and I will end there, speaking about mental maps and the landscape we have, as Pan-African youth, we should have this mental map of dignity. And if I go to Kenya and I'm seeing, and I'm valued, I won't be seen as a problem, something immigration needs to sort out, but I will be seen as someone who brings value. And this is the agenda we need to bring forward. Now, the trouble we are having is that it is not that our generation is not about what you are saying about the bullet, it's not about the big fights. It's really about organization. And I want to put this question. Does our generation need another conflict to be more proactive? Or can we be sustaining the little good stories that we have to actually bring Africa to another level? Because if you look at this room here, you won't think that you are talking about life and death issues. Now, do we need to be confronted with it again to move? But if we move then, are we going always to start from scratch? So these are really the challenges we have as a young generation, knowing what is our generational task and what is the incentive that will make us fulfill this generational task. Thank you.
Well, such as it's a very important observation that he makes, though. Every time you hear about African liberation movement, it's about death and destruction. It's about resistance by bullets. Not to overquote Malcolm, but he says revolutions are bloody by their very nature. But, you know, is it really appealing to African youth who are here to envision a revolution that is not bloody, that is not about resistance? In fact, you know, can we eliminate revolutions of that type altogether? What kind of Africa would that be? And, you know, I'll put this question to you, Jean Bosco. What kind of marketplace of ideas, for that matter, can we construct and maybe leave as a question for this conference, where the Africa that we want is an Africa that doesn't have liberation leaders that are war heroes, where the new heroes of that marketplace that are perhaps business people like yourself?
Thank you very much. As he mentioned, my name is Jean Bosco Nzeimana. I'm the founder and the owner of Habona Limited, a company that I started for producing affordable, environmentally friendly fuels in terms of biogas in my rural village. So it was a challenge for me, as you were saying, because most of the time when we are Africans, we always say that in order to gain a roof or a slot for, for us to speak, we have to take weapons and fight for our freedom. But for me, the perspective that I use when I'm doing my thing is that I have to take into account my time. I used to say, what I'm doing in this small time that I have. So instead of thinking about other matters, I first of all think about business. When I'm thinking about business, I'm thinking about the benefit that I will gain from that business, and I'm also thinking about the benefit that other people will find from my business. For example, a simple story that I can tell you is that, first of all, I play two kind of games, and right now, I think it's a right mix for me. Those games that I'm talking about are, one part I'm a student, and the part I'm a business owner. So I need to manage my time efficiently and effectively. At school, they need me, and in my business, many people are recording saying, hey, things are not going well. We need you to be here. There are some issues that you need to fix. So I think I'm liberated because I'm playing such a game. So I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting my time not firing bullets to my neighbors in order to gain freedom. But I don't want to say maybe the ambassador can not take it right, because he can say we are fighting in Somalia, and then you are saying that fighting is not the way of getting to freedom. So this is not what I'm saying. But for us, the youth, I just want you to understand that we have to take opportunities of this climate that this gentleman who has fought for us have provided. This is because right now we spend most of our time thinking about what has happened in the past. But right now, I want you to turn your eyes thinking about what you can do as long as we have a good climate such this that we have right now. When you are young, just like me, I used to say that I'm young because I'm 20 years old, but I don't know the kind of young people you used to say, but I think I'm young. So I was just frustrated because I just wanted to make change in my society. And the very big problem that I met is financial problems. And most of the youth here can agree with me that when you want to start something great, the first thing that you meet is that you don't have financial capacity to back your ideas. But right now, I cannot say that financial problems are more problems. So now there are solutions beyond financial problems. For example, we could take opportunity of these meetings that you are having to build our network. Because, for example, the level that I am at right now is not because I have millions of dollars. It's just because of network. It was a very big problem for me to build such network, and that's why if you are a youth pretending to do something great, you have also to think about the time that to build network will take you. I'm saying this because I just thought of doing something when I was in secondary school. I just saw how business were run, but I said I have no way to do business. I started by making something like experiment by just having an inventory of 2 eggs. I used those 2 eggs to take them to the market so that I can see whether someone can come and buy at least 1 egg. And I assumed if 1 egg is bought, maybe the remaining of the egg will also be bought, and then I will nurture my inventory again. So I played such a game, and fortunately, one customer that I met was willing 100 eggs, and I had 2 eggs. As a businessman of the moment, I said, don't worry, this is not my headquarters. I just came here just to inform you that I have opened up a business, and if you need more eggs, just take these 2, and I will take my truck to bring you other eggs tomorrow. So the gentleman had really a trust in me, but I was lying, and those eggs that I had was the one I have stolen from my parents' poultry. But from there, I've gained a very good experience of how things are done. From that period, I've seen that people are no more thinking about the Africa that we people are saying. The Africa that we people are saying is not Africa of diagnosing problems, but is Africa of taking this time so that you can start the real activities. So, by concluding, I don't want to take much time, but what I want to say is to remind youth that there are available opportunities. For example, if you are a university college, don't think of going to banks to ask for loans, but take count of those networking opportunities. You can benefit from them. And from me, I'm here because, first of all, I gained my first spotlight because I won the African Innovation Prize. It is a competition which is open to every student, and if you have a brilliant idea, you can just enter the competition, and from there you can gain the spotlight. And gentlemen like these people who are here can see you, and they can hear your idea, and then you can communicate and see how you can improve your stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean Bosco. Another round of applause for my panel. I was asked to stop 5 minutes ago, but I think that Jean Bosco wraps it up very well. The heroes of tomorrow may not be recognizable today. They may not be men in military uniform. They may be different institutions, actually. companies and products. And I'd like to wish all of you well in your endeavors, and to the panel here who are in the private sector, prosperity wherever they take their ideas. Thank you very much.
Before the panel goes, we can have one question. If someone is dying to ask a question to the panelists. Any question? People too hungry? At the back. Question? Hi. The mic is coming just behind you.
Hello. Thank you. My name is Prince, and I would like to ask a question to Margaret Ward from Senegal. Actually, let me give a positive. She's really, actually, I think all ladies from Africa should have a look on Ward, because he really inspired me. And it's really interesting to have someone like Ward here. So my question is, what she told us about the story that she was born in Cote d'Ivoire, and she went in Europe, Western countries. So what I think Western countries have been contributing something to the success of a company. So I would like, please, can you give us some keywords about attitude and self-esteem of those Western countries to whom, of course, we bought their product and we use their product. Can you give us some keywords telling us Western guys, they do think like this one, they do work like this one, which is different from Africans' nature? Thank you.
I didn't hear all of his questions. Hold on, I'm just trying to make sure I understood your question right. I learned to make sure I know what you... Did you hear it right? I didn't hear some of it.
Yeah, it was kind of...
Are you... can you repeat just the question, please? Because I'm not sure I understand.
Absolutely. So my point is, you have been in Africa as well as in Western countries, Europe, and you've seen attitude of Europeans as well as Africans. So can you make a comparison, tell us these are things you have to learn to those Western countries? Because I think West countries contribute to the success of a company. If so, if I'm not outside the point, you can tell us a bit about what have you learned from Westerns as well as Africans, and what African can learn from Western to develop the better Africa.
Very much. Thank you. You know, the convergence of forces that I use for my companies, and it's funny because my companies all use the same formula. I mean, as a matter of fact, Forbes calls me the Senegalese woman who sells African recipes to the West. But it's very simple. You know, I truly do believe that in the 21st century, there's something today that people don't realize. The new market, you know, because when you start something, at least I'm not interested in looking at the yesterday's customer. I'm always interested in looking at who is going to be the customer of tomorrow. That's who I'm working for, because that's what's going to ensure my, you know, the fact that I'm going to stay around. So one thing that I have noticed is that what you call the mainstream customer today, they are basically looking at products that maybe were good for the brands that are here today. But what we as Africans have, that this customer base really wants, is our ways even at looking at something as just regular as even death. The foods that we eat, the knowledge, the know-how that we have. You see, today the West has come to a place of pure disease and illness. People are ill in their bodies and people are ill in their minds. And I think this is where our time has come to the rescue of humanity, quite frankly. I believe that with everything that I have. So those assets that we have in our indigenous culture is what this customer base, and I call them the cultural creative demographic. It's an amazing customer base. We have a customer base of the future. So that's what we have. What I have learned from the West in terms of how to do things, somebody said it earlier. You know, I like to say that I see excellence as a form of truth. And truth, as we all know, always prevails. And that's one thing that Africans do not take seriously. And we have to say the truth. So excellence and no shortcuts, regardless of how long it's going to take you. That's what I have learned. But I want to say that I didn't learn it from the Westerners. I learned that from my grandmother. I just happened to have seen it executed more often in the West. That's really all. So to me, it's looking around and looking at, you know, what's going on and picking. And even where, you know, when I started my first company, people were laughing at me. They were laughing at me saying, oh, we sent you to the best European schools and you're here selling flour beverages. And that's the other attitude that we have here. We cannot see the value in who we are and what we have until someone else sees it. And as long as you think that way, well, good luck being on the front line. I'm not waiting there with you. I decided to go and take a different path, and that's what I learned. I learned from the West to just go for what you want and to go for what you believe in, and don't wait for anybody.
All right. As you can see, we are really running short on time. So I'm going to thank the moderator and the panelists. Thank you very much for your candid and intelligent contributions.